Evening to everyone. Uh, so let me. I think the IBSL wanted to have the exam earlier, so they they advise us all the presenters to have extra session. But it looks like uh, this may be the extra session only because they don't continue any extra session. It looks like the exam also might get delayed due to the present situation. So we will have our usual class as it is on Sundays. Might not have the extra classes if it's not required. If they are going with their normal schedule without having the exams in advance, I don't think the extra classes are required. So we will have our usual Sunday classes. Here in after probably we will have our usual Sunday classes until the normal uh, terms are nearing, right? So we will have it. So let us start. I think the previous session we are into international trade. We went through everything. I think the bank guarantee is the one we need to discuss. Am I correct? I think
Yes,
okay, yes, okay. Bank guarantee is something that I think we stopped it with the previous slide, which is mitigating international risk. I think you know the international risk, right? So we have gone through uh, country political risk. I think that the notes also I sent you. Just probably some of you would have gone through. Just go through the notes and be aware. I don't think we will ask you so technical question, but at least you should know in international trade what are the risks. So when it comes to political risk, exchange rate risk, right, and the counterparty, the credit risk, right, and cargo risk. There are so many risks are there. So I think I've given fair set of notes to you. Just go through it, and if you have any doubts, you can clarify. Stop me and clarify at any time. Uh, so let us move on to this bank guarantee. I think the bank guarantee, though the product is not very popular, in real terms, in a ground situation, the bank guarantee facilitating lot of transactions, right? Though it's not so, unlike LCs, everybody knows what is letter of credit. But when it comes to bank guarantee, people think the bank guarantee is a special instrument. Uh, yes, it is a special instrument, but this is heavily used, especially when it comes to routine supplies and mostly on when you take to an international side, lot of projects. So when it comes to project, bank guarantee is a must because the bank guarantee will ensure if there are two contract between two people, the employer who is appointing other service provider to buy some goods or services, the employer taking a risk by selecting a person to perform either buy the goods or services. So there is a possibility that service provider may not deliver what is expected by the employer. So as a result, there is a financial loss at the end of the whatever the contract. So this is what happened in 70s, 1970s, when in Middle East countries flushed with lot of uh, crude oil. When they started selling crude oil, they have enough for plenty of liquidity, cash. So they started giving most of this. Now you can see in Dubai, now considered as one of the tour attraction, right? So they did there. It's a kind of a desert, right? Almost desert. So, but they built up in such a way where these all this money because of the crude oil they have, that is their wealth. So when these wealth were found, initial stages, they they deploy lot of foreign contractor to come and do lot of projects in those countries like Middle Eastern countries like Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar. All these countries have enough wealth because of the crude oils, because these countries are situated in an environment where they have those deposits of crude oil, so they can easily sell it, and that is the required one. So what happened, those stages, those period, they started selling this crude oil initially, and a lot of money got into the country. Now they started all these people, it's almost like a desert, so they want building up all those water. uh, they started building up bridges, railway, airport, all the seaport, all they started building up. Then what happened? They are given the contract to some unknown people because everybody comes in. They want to do a project, so they don't have any. They didn't have any instruments to ensure the final supplier or the service provider deliver a exact job. No, they didn't have any instrument. Then came the bank guarantee, which was used. Then they realized they have spent a lot of money, but end of the day, the contractor did a not a expected level contract, and he just vanished. So they realized to cover this risk, then there has been a situation bank guarantees. They started utilizing the bank guarantee. That is how in 70 the bank guarantee became popular. Now, if you really look at it now, if anybody want to do a contract, giving the contract to anybody, the employer, it's a become a must. Bank guarantee should be given by the guy you deliver the performance. So it's kind of a binding, where if you deploy somebody to do a proper job, if the person doesn't deliver, you have to get hold of him and get that whatever job as promised to deliver. So the bank guarantee is the instrument indirectly supporting, facilitating this kind of a transaction to take place. So the bank guarantee is kind of a undertaking given by a bank, right? So it is simple. You need not to do any conditional. It's generally guarantees are called unconditional. So there is in letter of credit, in LCs, lot of conditions. You have to fulfill the documents, you have to ship the given date. But bank guarantee totally unconditional. There is no conditional attached to bank guarantee. Simply a demand, on-demand guarantees. You call on-demand guarantee. So what is this? A bank giving undertaking in writing to a beneficiary if the particular person failed to perform. As a result, you incur a financial losses, you could claim it under the bank guarantee. So it's just plain vanilla document where you could easily claim it, just making a letter saying this particular applicant has defaulted as per the contract. As a result, I am claiming under the guarantee. That's all required. You can write a letter along with the guarantee, give it to the bank, bank will credit the money. So that kind of instrument called bank guarantee. So bank guarantee also, as I told you, ICC publishes different rules. So they did publish a rule called URDG, stand for Uniform Rules for Demand Guarantee. That current version is 758. Earlier version is 458. The current version is 758. So this is again, you have learned UCP, Uniform Rules for Collection, URC you learn. Now you also aware, not when I say learn, there is set of rules are there. Even for guarantee, there is a set of rules, which is just abbreviation is called URDG, stand for Uniform Rules for Demand Guarantee. The current version is 758. Again, this is published by International Chamber of Commerce. All these publications are ICC. You may call it as ICC. Right. This is the version 758. Let us see. There are two types of guarantees. Right. So there are two types of guarantees: direct guarantees and indirect guarantees. So I will just explain you what is direct guarantee, and then we'll go to indirect guarantee. Right. Let's see direct guarantee. So I will give you an example. There is a contract between two parties, right? There is a supplier, there is an employee. Employee is the person always giving a job to supplier. You have to do this transaction. I am deploying you. So the employee is the person always get the guarantee in favor. In guarantee, employee is the person trusting the other person to do a contract. So end of the day, if anything happens, it is the employee who is going to suffer the losses. It could be financial losses, it could be whatever damages to the asset what he intend to ask the supplier or distributor to perform. So if he underperform, ultimately the employer is going to suffer. In order to get out of this, whatever losses he incur, he want to mitigate that risk, he asks for a bank guarantee. So let us see how this bank guarantee works in a direct guarantee situation, right? There is a contract between two people. Let's say the employer, let's assume we will take example as Nestle. Nestle is the employer. So, okay, I'll give you an example so it's easy for you to remember. The Nestle importing all this milk powder. There are so many distributors. So one of the distributor, he the one supplying all those. He's become a distributor. He buys, he get hold of the milk product. He started supplying to retail shops. So he will have an office, he will have a fleet of vehicle, and he will have people to work under him, and they go and giving it to the retail shop. You would have seen in your location, there must be van vehicle coming and putting those stuff to a retail shop. Those are the distributor. So one distributor might have a vast area covered. Let's assume there's a contract between Nestle and a distributor, where Nestle gives certain amount of goods to him on a credit basis. When I say credit basis, because the supplier has to supply to the retail shop and collect the money, and then only he will pay. Because he doesn't have so much of working capital to store this goods. So employers knows this. This is how the trades are taking place. So employer want to cover this. In the event supplier doesn't repay whatever commodity given, say Nestle giving 10 million worth of goods to this particular supplier, distributor. It's island wide distributor. Say 10 million worth of goods are given by Nestle. Now Nestle asking, okay, I'm going to give you contract is I'm going to give you 10 million worth of goods, but I want a bank guarantee. So when Nestle asks the bank guarantee, when the employer asks the bank guarantee, this guy has to go to the bank. So he will go to the bank, asking his bank, he's giving instruction, I want to issue a bank guarantee favoring the employer. So he's become applicant. So he's only making the request to the bank. So he's giving instruction to his bank. That is his bank. You call it as issuing bank. Based on his instruction, they will issue a guarantee favoring the employer. So employer accept the guarantee. So this is they issue the guarantee. The employer become a beneficiary. So you know there is an underlying transaction, separate underlying transaction between these two people. Now you can see the bank guarantee comes as a secondary. Underlying transaction, this guy supplying milk powder, employer supplying milk powder to 10 million worth of goods to this particular supplier. This supplier has to sell it, collect the money from retail shops and repay to the Nestle. That is the underlying contract. That underlying contract as it is, it will go. Why Nestle wanted a bank guarantee? In the event, if the distributor doesn't pay as agreed, as per the contract, Nestle will suffer the losses. In order to cover that loss only, he wanted, okay, I will give you 10 million worth of good, but I want a bank guarantee. So he goes to his bank and asks his bank to issue a bank guarantee. This issuing bank has issued the guarantee. So you might ask the question, is it bank issue guarantee to everybody? No. The bank will only issue guarantee, they will take that money in advance. Or like LCs. So he has to, the applicant, the distributor should have a relationship with the bank. He should have mortgages assets. And then he has a limit. So he knows if he doesn't repay the Nestle, because the Nestle wanted to ensure the payment is somehow other received after the credit period. If the distributor or the supplier want to play out, if he intend to cheat this employer, then there is no way without the bank guarantee. So only way to stop this by requesting a bank guarantee. Now you can see when the bank guarantee is issued to the beneficiary has an instrument with his hand, which is a piece of paper. It remains as a piece of paper as far as supply is making the payment. As far as supply is making the payment to Nestle, there is no bank guarantee. It's a piece of paper. The bank guarantee come into force when the distributor default the payment. As a result, employers now, because the employer has given 10 million worth of goods, he has to pay the 10 million as per the agreed terms, maybe 6 months' time. But a distributor not making the payment. Now, employer wants him, look here, you have to make the payment. So he's purposely or willfully defaulting. So he can't do that. Now he knows by after giving a bank guarantee, he is obliged, because otherwise his account will be getting debited, his facility will be blocked, he will be losing 10 million. So he will never going to default because he has issued the bank guarantee. So you can see how the distributor has been bound to make his obligation without fail. That is because there is a guarantee issued. So the employer covering this transaction by taking a guarantee. So this kind of a guarantee called direct guarantee. Why? The guarantee is issued directly by a bank to the beneficiary. So you call direct guarantee. Directly a bank gives a guarantee, direct guarantee. This is classic example, local supply. Within Sri Lanka, local supply. This is generally happens in domestically, direct guarantee. But indirect guarantee happens in foreign contract. So we move on to the So direct guarantee, you know now, right? So when there is an obligation from the other party, if the obligation doesn't deliver, or if the party who's supposed to perform its financial obligation fail to make the obligation, or if he delay the payment or default the payment, as a result, the employer as a going to face a financial losses. We try to cover the financial losses by claiming the bank guarantee. Therefore, he will supply the goods upon receipt of the bank guarantee only. So the 10 million goods are given to him after obtaining a bank guarantee. The bank guarantee will carry a validity period of 1 year. It can be renewable. Bank guarantee is not a indefinite. It's generally 1 year. So when the 1 year over, the beneficiary will say your bank guarantee is getting expired. I want this guarantee to be extended by further 1 year. As far as the routine supplies are taking place, the bank guarantee will get extended. Sometime, let's say 10 million guarantee is given. Now he started giving lesser product. The importer he has a lot of problem. The employer has a lot of problem. He's a direct importer and importing milk and giving. So employer has his capacity reduced. So say 10 million is the original guarantee given. Now the employer giving only 2 million worth of goods. So what will happen? So the employer will ask the applicant will go to his bank and say, I don't want to block my 10 million because I'm not buying any more 10 million goods from him. Only 2 million goods I am buying now. So he will reduce the guarantee value, which is beneficiary also agreeable, because the beneficiary supply any given time 2 million only. So when the value is reduced, the guarantee value also can be reduced. If the value is enhanced, the guarantee value also need to be enhanced. But the guarantees are generally given for a specific period, which is 1 year general, right? Then let us move to indirect guarantee. So the bank become a guarantor. So the issuing bank become a guarantor. This is how the direct guarantee called for. Let us see. If you want to make a note, just make a note on before we move on to indirect guarantee, direct guarantee, and say direct guarantees are used. Direct guarantees are used generally for supplies of goods and services, between two parties within a country. Remember, the word generally mean, it doesn't mean that direct guarantee cannot be used for foreign transaction. No, generally direct guarantees are used in local transaction. That is what I said in general. Generally, when the goods are supplied between two parties, goods and services supplied between two parties, those guarantees are called direct guarantees. So you can continue to write and say the guarantee is issued by the bank. The guarantee issued by a bank. On behalf of its customers' instruction. On behalf of its customers' instruction. In favor of a third party. Based on underlying contract. Therefore, the bank issue the guarantee become guarantor. You can see the guarantor. The bank who issue the guarantee become guarantor. and the party who gives the instruction, the party who gives the instruction to the bank, the party who gives the instruction to the bank, the party who gives the instruction to the bank to issue the guarantee is called, the party who gives the instruction to issue the guarantee is called applicant. Called applicant. Is called applicant. And the guarantees are issued in favor of, the guarantees are issued in favor of third party, favor of third party, favor of third party, and they are called as beneficiary, and they are called beneficiary, and they are called as beneficiary, and they are called as beneficiary. So you know the three parts. There is underlying contract, based on the contract, applicant giving instruction to the bank, and the beneficiary. Right. Let us see indirect bank guarantee. So I will give you an example, then I will put the picture to you. Right. So take example. I'm just giving an example without looking at the picture. Right. Then I will explain. When I put the picture, you will have more clarity. Let's say there is a transaction between a local. I told you generally indirect guarantees happen in overseas contract, right? So you can see that there are a lot of projects are taking place in Sri Lanka, right? So there are a lot of projects taking place, infrastructure projects. So you can see the road projects are taking place, highway projects are taking place, bridges. There are a lot of bridges they are building, right? So there is in rural side there are rural bridges projects are taking place, airport, port city, all these are big projects, right? So water purification, all these are bigger projects. Hospital, putting up hospital, all these ambulance, all these are bigger projects. So when there are bigger projects involved, right, and these contractors, these people who give this kind of special services are generally foreign contractors. So if you take Sri Lanka, we are more towards Chinese now. So we are solely depending more. Most of our contracts are now about to China. So China seems cheaper. One reason, and other reason is they assist us in a bigger way, right? Unlike other countries. So there are a lot of contract awarded to China. As a result, China is performing a lot of contract in Sri Lanka. Now you could see the contractors are China, right? And the employer is we. We are deploying them to do this project. So sometimes this project cost is funded by them. That is different. Maybe some of the contractor, the money is given by World Bank to us. We are selecting an appropriate cheaper contractor and giving award it to them. There could be World Bank funding us to put up all our hospital at a higher level, a particular standard to maintain. So every hospitals in Sri Lanka need to be upgraded. So this project is given to some other European companies. But the cost of the project is borne by the World Bank as a donation, because these are medical. So medically, generally, international organization assisting poor countries, especially in medical supplies, right? So if there is a contract, then what happens? And our people are going to deploy somebody to perform a contract. Then what happens? That contractor has to ensure that he is delivering a better work. Whatever it could be goods or service, he has to supply the goods or service as expected level by the employer. So I will give you, I will take an example. You know the picture now, right? Let's assume there is a project in Sri Lanka upgrading of all our telecom lines, which is now underground cabling. So island-wide there is a project. Let's assume there is a project. SLT working on a project with a European company to make all the telecom line underground, all the wiring into underground, so that we will not have any disturbance even during a natural disaster or whatever, right? So that is a bigger project. Let's say the project is $100 million. Example, right? $100 million. Now, when there is a project is going to take place in Sri Lanka, and this project is definitely will be awarded because we don't have expertise to do this in within Sri Lanka. So definitely we have to go to internationally and to call for a tender. So what we will do, we will be bidding this international. So there will be lot of foreign people trying to apply for this bid. So there will be tender. You know what is tender, right? When you want to buy a service or goods or services in a large scale, you won't be able to select choosing each and every person is very difficult practical. So you float a tender. When you float a tender, everybody applicable eligibility people will apply. So when they apply, all the application will come to you. Then you will select who is the appropriate person who could do this, and you will award the contract. So this is what you call tender. So in Sri Lanka, now SLT want to give this entire telecom lines to somebody overseas, and they float a tender. When they float a tender and they have mentioned a condition, this particular tender, when they call for a tender, whoever going to do this project, they have to give a bank guarantee. And that bank guarantee also needs to be given by a local bank in Sri Lanka, not by the foreign bank. Because the SLT do not deal with any foreign bank directly, and they don't have SWIFT and all to communicate with them. You know what is SWIFT? Huh? That's a mode you to communicate to the foreign bank to exchange messages, especially authenticated messages. So there's no way the SLT do not have a SWIFT mechanism, and they are not expert into that. So they wanted a local bank to issue a guarantee. So you can see now the contract is taking place Sri Lanka. The people who are bidding for this are overseas, and there's a guarantee to be given. With that knowledge, now let's see this picture how it works. There is a contract. What is the contract? Upgrading telecom line. There is a foreign supplier, or the people who have the expertise to do this project are called supplier or contractor, and they are in different countries. And this is the employer, which is SLT, want to give the contract to upgrade the telecom line. SLT had categorically told this guarantee need to be issued by a local bank in Sri Lanka. We don't accept any direct guarantee from the supplier's bank. Now what will happen? Supplier will go to his bank and he will talk to his bank and say, he's become applicant, he's giving instruction to his bank, I want to issue a guarantee. I want to issue a guarantee for a project in Sri Lanka. So this guy, let's take example, this guy is in Germany. Germany is the supplier, and German want to do this project in Sri Lanka. So they saw the tender, they want to apply. So they go to their banker and ask the bank, we want to issue a guarantee in Sri Lanka. Do you have any correspondent bank in Sri Lanka? So the German bank will say, yeah, we do have. So that bank will check with the local bank, and the local bank also agree. Then they will, based on the instruction of their customer, which is a telecom company or into that business in Germany is the applicant, and they go to the German bank. That bank will communicate to they are going to give the instruction to one of the local bank. They will communicate one of the local bank, which is, we'll say, Bank of Ceylon. This is Bank of Ceylon. Now they are communicating to Bank of Ceylon, asking Bank of Ceylon whether they can issue a guarantee favoring SLT. Right. Now what will happen? And they are giving a counter guarantee. So now see what is happening. The foreign bank instructing bank giving a counter guarantee. So when they give a counter guarantee to issuing bank. So they are giving a counter guarantee to issuing bank. So what will happen? When they give the counter guarantee, they will be identified as counter guarantor. The issuing bank is in Bank of Ceylon. So they are going to issue a guarantee. When they issue the guarantee to the employer, they issue the guarantee, SLT becomes the beneficiary, and the issuing bank is the guarantor. So you can see here under indirect guarantee, there are two banks involved. Why the two banks involved? Because this is an international transaction. So if you take international transaction, all the guarantees are generally accepted as indirect guarantee. Why? Because the beneficiary is in one country, the applicant is in another country. Therefore, all this time beneficiary do not deal with the applicant. Let's say the applicant contract is Germany. It could be Italy, it could be France, it could be Japan, it could be China. Any of those. So any of the contractor is in overseas, they are going to do a project. So how can SLT, the beneficiary is SLT. How can SLT accept a guarantee from a German bank? How can they accept a guarantee from a Chinese bank or Japanese bank? Because they don't have any mode to communicate to them. Therefore, they prefer their local bank, which is a Bank of Ceylon. So always in overseas contract, indirect guarantees are issued. Okay, indirect guarantee facilitate, because then you have to remember there is something called counter guarantee. What is that counter guarantee? That means the German bank has told Bank of Ceylon, you issue a guarantee for which we are giving a counter guarantee to you. We are giving a counter guarantee to you, so that if you have any problem, if an employer SLT claims the bank guarantee, Bank of Ceylon will pay and they will claim it from the German bank. That is how. Suppose say there is a problem in this contract, right? Say this foreign supplier want to upgrade the telecom line and it's not doing the project well on time. Therefore, SLT want to make a claim. So when SLT claim, they will approach Bank of Ceylon. Bank of Ceylon in turn will approach the German bank, and the German bank will have to pay Bank of Ceylon. Then Bank of Ceylon immediately will pay to the SLT. That is how these guarantees are structured. That is the reason SLT wanted a guarantee to be issued by a local bank, which is you call indirect guarantee. Is that clear now? So under indirect guarantee, there will be 4 types: bid bond, performance guarantee, advance payment guarantee, retention guarantee. So I told you, when they float the contract, in this example, when they float the contract, this is the contract, right? This is the underlying contract. This is separate transaction, right? Why SLT wanted a guarantee? Because when they giving a contract to somebody, first of all they have to select the contractor. So when they select the contractor, everybody going to bid it. This is not only one applicant. I'm just giving an example. Say that when there's a project in 100 million worth of project, SLT want to do upgrade their telecom line. Don't think only one applicant. There will be 100 of applicants will come. There will be 100 of bank guarantee will be issued favoring SLT, because everybody applying. So much of application is coming, because SLT quoted a tender, international tender. Therefore, every supplier, every people who have the expertise to do this telecom line upgrading, everybody will apply. So as a result, there will be so many tender guarantees will come. So that when there is a bank guarantee supported with a tender is called bid bond. That is what you call bid bond. You also may call it as a tender guarantee. Then supported by performance, then advance payment guarantee, then the retention guarantee. So let us go through one by one. I will give you a small note after going through. Bid bond, also called as tender guarantee. This is the first guarantee. They have to attach the tender documents when they submit. They have to attach a bid bond or tender guarantee with the application when they submit. So once the contract, then SLT will go through all the application and they shortlist. There were 25 applications from 25 countries. They downgrade, they downlist to 5. They shortlist to 5. From the 5 main contractors, they are going to select, because they will have a committee. SLT will have a committee, technical committee. So they will select by their experience, and they will do some research on each supply, because this is 5-year project and 100 million cost, huge project. So there will be separate committee appointed by SLT. And they want to ensure all the skills are put together to finalize this contract, right? Then that expertise team will go through and downsize to that 25 application to 5, and they finally select one. Once the bidder is selected, then the bid bond need to be replaced by a performance bond. So always bid bond, you can see this is for a short period. Bid bond is used when there is a tender is called. The contractor has to submit the tender with a bid bond or a tender guarantee, right? Which is generally 1% of the contract value. So here you can see it is 1% to 5%. Because you also can understand when the 1% of what? 1% of the contract value. Here the contract value is $100 million, I said, example. So the bid bond value is 1 million. When there is 100 million, 1% is 1 million. So generally what happens, when you are looking for a large project, and when you are expecting a lot of people to take part, you don't call it for 10%, 15%, because that is
contract value is 100 million. So people can't give their bank facility to issue a guarantee for 15 million, 10 million, 12 million. It's large. Then what will happen? Only few bigger company only can apply. But if you want to ensure a lot of people won't apply, you reduce the bid bond value by bringing down the percentage less than 1%. Sometimes for 50 basis point or 1%. So you know what is 1%? 1% is equal to how many points, basis points. You call bips, BPS, bips. 100 bips mean 1%. Remember, right? 100 bips mean 1%. 50 bips mean half a percent. 0.5 is 50 bips. So remember, anybody, any rate changes on the 18 took place day before yesterday. Anybody who reads the newspaper, who see the messages, anything central bank did? Anybody? By the way, what are the 4 rates we studied? Huh? What are the 4 rates we studied? Can anybody tell me?
SDFR,
Huh?
SDFR,
What is that?
SDFR,
SPFR, okay.
SLFR,
SLFR, okay. Then anybody, other two? Any other person?
SRR, statutory reservation.
SRR, very good. Then there is one more, bank rate. Okay. Now these rates all got revised. Anybody who knows what is the revise? Is SPFR gone to 5%? So it was 4.5. So if you see the news, it has increased by 50 basis point, they say. So 50 basis point means half a percent. It was 4.5. Now the current rate is 5. So you need to jot down these rates. Huh? The new rate is 5.5%. That is SPFR. SLFR, it was 5.5. Now 6%. That both rates got enhanced by 50 basis point. So 4.5 become 5, 5.5 become 6. Now the SDFR 5%, SLFR 6%. Bank rate is 9%. I think early it was 8, now 9. Anybody SRR? What was the percentage we had all this time?
2%.
What is that?
2%. Now
How much?
it's 4%. It
Yes,
was 2%. Now
yes.
it's 4%.
Very good. It was 2% until 18. Now it's 4%, right? So remember these 4 rates are, I told you in the notes also, these are they are regular on a frequency. I think 10 times a year they revive this rate. So at least 10 times mean you can see, maybe not on every month, maybe every 1.5 months they revise this. So last revision done, they no changes, but this time due to the country situation and the liquidity issues, they felt it the rate should be increased by 50 basis point. So both rate got increased, and also they felt it that a lot of credits, lot of people are borrowing, so they want to probably to reduce the credit growth. That is why they increase the SRR. So by increasing the SRR, now bank lending capacity will come down, because bank has to keep more rupee with the central bank. So you should know that, right? Okay. So coming back to our bid bond story, it is 1%, which is 100 basis point. Sometimes you can call for the guarantee for 50 basis point, that is 0.5, less than 1%, 50 basis point. So remember, 100 basis point equal to 1%. 50 basis point equal to half a percent, right? So when you read the news, the policy rates have been increased by 50 basis point. You should know 50 mean half a percent. That means 4.5 to 5, 5.5 to 6, right? Okay. Now, when you are increasing, when the employer increasing the bid bond ratio, lesser people will apply, because they have to keep the security when they issue a bid bond. Like local guarantee, the counter guarantee, the applicant when he goes to his German bank will not issue a counter guarantee without the money. So the foreign supplier has to keep the money. If the guarantee values are large, small company can't apply, because they can't keep 2 million worth of dollar guarantee to be issued. There are a lot of commission involved. So bank won't issue the guarantee. There will be fee, commission. So a fee also charged based on the value of the guarantee. So therefore, generally bid bond, 1% is the level, 1 to 5%. The contract value is lesser, you can go for 2 to 3%, or the range is starting from 1 to 5% of the contract value. That is the bid bond value, right? If the contract is 100 million, the bid is 1%, means 1 million is the bid bond value, right? So the bid bond will be replaced by performance bond. That is what we are going to study. What do you mean by bid bond is replaced by performance? Why the bid bond is replaced by performance? Remember, when you want to do a contract, you call for everybody to give an application. So there are 100 applications came. You downsize to only 5 applications. You shortlist to 5 applicants, right? You shortlist because of the technical committee recommendation. Now, out of the A, B, C, D, E, only 5 people you selected. Now you are going to select the final person. If you select the final person, all others bid bond become eventually naturally goes away, because there is no point. They are not insisting anything. All the bid bond will become null and void. It will cancel. Only one guy who has been awarded has to replace that particular bid bond by the performance, because he is the contractor, won the contract. So you must remember, when a bid is, when lot of people are bidding, if a one person who has been selected by the employer to perform the contract, he will be has to replace, because he is the one going to do the project. So the contractor has to replace his bid bond to performance bond. So thereafter, he will go to the same bank, same theory will apply. Now the SLT will ask, okay, we have given the contract to you. Now you have to replace the bid bond by the performance. So you can see, generally bid bond are for a shorter period, maybe 6 months valid, because you only want to select the person. Once the selection criteria is over, you select the contractor, the bid bond is null and void. Now you tell the selected person, okay, now you have given the bid bond, no, right? He signed the contract. When he signed the contract, you will tell him, okay, we want a guarantee that you will perform this project for a 3-year period or 4-year period. So the performance guarantee is generally longer period. And the proportion also you can see 5 to 10% or 15%. Because what happened, when the SLT going to give this project to particular guy X after all the criteria selected, X has to perform. So SLT wanted him to give a bank guarantee not for now 1 million or 10 million now. 10% they asking us. Because the contractor going to do the project, he has been selected now. So once he's selected, he's going to do a project. Now SLT has to remit money to the contractor in advance to do this. Every time when there is a job to be done, they have to send the money also, right? Now you can see there is a performance, then comes advance payment. As and when the SLT want to make a payment to the contractor, they will ask him to give a bank guarantee, because they want to ensure every time they send the money, the contractor giving advance payment guarantee, so that the employer knows the money that they remitted to the contractor will be used for this particular project. So you can see the same contract, there were 3 guarantees involved. First time selecting criteria, bid bond involved. Once the bid is finalized, the bidder, the contractor, selected contractor has to replace the tender bond by performance guarantee. Then once the performance is on, they are trying to remit some money. So before they remit the money, they ask the contractor, you better give an advance payment guarantee, we will send you the money. Because they want to ensure at least a certain percentage of money is, now you can see the contract, when the SLT is given, is generally what will happen is, when the contract is awarded, SLT finalize the contract. The contractor will say, we want 50 million to be paid to us. 50 million to be paid to us. But SLT is saying, okay, we will pay 50 million, but we want a bank guarantee 10% of the contract value. Whereas 50% of the contract money you are sending, but SLT can't ask the entire 50 million guarantee and making the payment. No, they can't do that. Only they can ask for a certain percentage. Why? They know they will be using the money. But in the event something is not taking place, at least to cover some certain percentage, only this 5%, 10% coming in. So you should not get confused. Only they are getting 5% or 10%. No, SLT might pay $50 million as 50% advance payment for them to do the project. But they will ask the guarantee to be given only 10% of the contract value. That means if the contract value is 100 million, SLT going to remit 50 million. That's fine. But the out of 100 million contract value, 10 million they want a guarantee. Though they remit 50 million, they can't ask the 50 million guarantee. No, that is not practically possible. They are going to use the money to do the project. But you asking certain proportion to support. At least if something happen, you can claim it. That is the reason you asking certain percentage, right? So you must remember advance payment guarantee comes. So you must also understand advance payment guarantee will have a reduction clause. You can see the last point. It may contain a reduction clause. Whenever you issue advance payment guarantee, remember that money is used for this particular project. When the advance payment is used and the contractor utilizing that money to perform, then you know certain amount of work is done. Then no point the contractor blocking his money for 10 million. Because out of the 10 million, you have remitter, you have the bank guarantee. He has almost 50% of the work is already done. Out of your 10 million guarantee, 5 million worth of job is already done. Then you SLT need not to have 10 million bank guarantee. They have to reduce the bank guarantee. So immediately contractor will say, look here, you wanted us to give advance payment guarantee, we gave you, but in the meantime we have already finished. You can see the project is taking place. All the lines are done, all the groundworks are done. It's a matter of now finalizing the entire other project. So 50% of the work is over now. Therefore, you have to reduce the guarantee. So remember, advance payment guarantee will have a reduction clause as and when the contractor performing the money that have been sent to the contractor, when he finishes the work, according to the proportion of the work completed, the guarantee need to be reduced. Otherwise, it's very unfair for the contractor to block his bank facility for 10 million, whereas he has delivered the work, almost 80% of the work is done. So no point keeping 10 million guarantee. It's a risk for him also. So therefore, the reduction clause is there. So you might be wondering, what is this retention guarantee? So I will explain to you. Let's assume this project is 4 years or 5 years. Okay. So the performance guarantee, advance guarantee, everything is now in force. Let's say this project is over by 2023, other 2 more years. By 2023, this project is over. But remember, by 23, before every money is sent, only they are holding about $5 million. Out of 100 million, 95 million, everything sent. Only 5 million SLT blocking. And they will say, we will release this 5 million if you give a retention guarantee. So carefully listen. Now the contract is about to over. Almost the contract, everything done, delivered, everything done. Now SLT says, out of 100 million, we sent already paid you 95. Only 5 million we have to pay you. But we will pay this last 5 million. But we want a retention guarantee. Can anybody tell me why SLT want a retention guarantee before they release the last payment?
To ensure the quality of the work?
Yeah, very good. To ensure the end work, once the telecom lines are given to the consumers and there is a deficiency. The people are saying now the reception is very bad. We are unable to listen. Earlier it was very clear in certain areas. Then you have a problem now. Just imagine if you paid all the money, the contractor gone. You won't be able to catch him. If we catch him, he will say, okay, I will do that. We want extra money. Now see, this is the beauty of the bank guarantee. So you can see by asking the bank guarantee, each and every stage of the contract is covered. Even you going up to the retention bond. So by keeping last 5 million, you ask him giving a retention bond, I will give you 5 million. But remember, my retention bond is there for 1 year. When we test all the lines, if the lines are perfect, okay, we don't want this guarantee. The guarantee become cancelled after 1 year. So until such time, they are keeping a piece of paper. So this is the reason the bank guarantees are called contingent liability. So remember, this is become only piece of paper. The even retention guarantee 5 million that SLT holding at the latter part of the contract, that just to ensure when that contract is started using by consumer, if there are complaints, there is a technical defect. So the SLT will inform the contractor, look here, there is a issue, come and do it. Definitely the contractor has to come and do it. Otherwise, he knows there could be a bank guarantee claim can come under retention guarantee. So you can see even the last part of the contract also they are covering by the bank guarantee. So that is how all these bank guarantees are covered. Okay. So you can make, I think that's that session is over. So just make some notes on this indirect guarantee and say, you can say indirect guarantees are generally used in foreign contracts where the applicant stroke contractor stroke supplier and the employer stroke beneficiary are in different countries and the beneficiary prefer to have the guarantee and the beneficiary prefers to have the guarantee issued by a local bank in his country. Therefore, the applicant instruct his bank to issue a guarantee. Applicant instruct his bank to issue a guarantee by a bank in the beneficiary's country. Comma, the applicant bank has to issue a counter guarantee, comma, the applicant's bank has to issue a counter guarantee to their correspondent bank. Applicant bank has to issue a counter guarantee to their correspondent bank in the beneficiary's country. To their correspondent bank in the beneficiary's country. So in this type of situation, there are four parties. The contractor is considered as applicant. the contractor is considered as applicant. The applicant bank is considered as counter guarantor. The applicant's bank is considered as counter guarantor. The applicant bank is considered as counter guarantor. And the issuing bank in the issuing bank is the beneficiary's country. And the issuing bank in the beneficiary's country. And the issuing bank in the beneficiary's country is guarantor. Is guarantor. Is guarantor. And the employee is considered as beneficiary. And the employee is considered as beneficiary. And the employee is considered as beneficiary. Okay, so let's move on to this. This is the current changes, right? Some of you, I don't know whether you are working in this area, because central bank has in 2017 they removed the exchange control. So most of you are aware there is something called exchange control, which have been used in more than 67 years in this country, which got replaced by Foreign Exchange Act. So that was done in 2017. So under this first slide, let me show you, then I go back here. So you can see here, the Exchange Control Act was 1953, you call ECA. That got replaced by Foreign Exchange Act. Remember the Act name, sometimes they must ask the Act name. Foreign Exchange Act number 12 of 2017. Effective date is 2017. Then the Exchange...
We didn't receive this note.
Sorry?
We didn't get this note.
You didn't get this note. I told them to share with you. Sure. Nobody has got this.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. So
No,
you can.
sir.
Okay, I will tell them to share. You can see the slide, right?
Yes.
Please, you bear with us. I don't think they are working on the at right now. So I will tell them to share with you probably in the weekend, tomorrow, day after. So we will just go through it. And there is a department. Just whatever important one, just make a note of it only. So I will ask them to share the slide. So this got replaced in 2020. So this is what has happened. The exchange control word was lot of pressure given to Sri Lanka, because when you say exchange control BF, no foreign direct investor willing to come to Sri Lanka, because they don't feel it to come, because there is a control. So this exchange control means anytime the control can be placed, they won't be able to take their money back, right? So that is the reason that exchange control was not very convincing, the word itself. Therefore, it has been there for 53 to 2007. You can say about 64 years it was used. More than 6 decades it was used. Then with great difficulty, they managed to change this, replace the exchange control by bringing in Foreign Exchange Act. Now this Foreign Exchange Act, when they say Foreign Exchange Act, is better now. There is no control. It's simply any country will have a Foreign Exchange Act. There is no control as such. As a result, the Exchange Control Department also renamed as Department of Foreign Exchange. Based on the Foreign Exchange Act, the name of the department is now goes as Department of Foreign Exchange. So remember these letters. ECA no more. Exchange Control Act is no more. Now the new one is FEA, Foreign Exchange Act. The department is called DFE. There is no ECD. Exchange Control Department is gone now. That will be replaced by DFE, Department of Foreign Exchange. And there is no controller. Even the controller word also, the designation of the person heading the division is called controller. His designation also changes, goes as a director Department of Foreign Exchange. Now this regulation came in 2017. This year in March, again they have revised this direction. With that only there were few accounts came in. So I don't know whether if you are working in this department, and most of the people are working in this department are aware that when a further revision came in March this year. With that, I have prepared all this presentation based on the latest revision. So let us look at it. What is the way forward? I think I missed out a few slides and gone. What is the objective and way forward? Because this Exchange Control Act is the word itself giving a disadvantage to the Sri Lankan economy. Why? When you say control, the foreign investors, foreigners, they don't like to come and invest here. So they feel the control can be anything. So that has been taken off. So you can see the simplification of regulation is anyway is going to attract the foreign investors rather than having lengthy or unknown regulation where the whatever the investment that was brought into the country, they might find it later on. There could be some regulation came in and they are unable to take the money out. So that kind of a element of doubt is always in existence within the investor. So that is the reason the government and the central bank want to make sure a lot of foreign inflow coming into the country by simplifying these regulations. So if you can, when I explained to you, when I showed you the slide, you can see how many accounts were there under the Exchange Control Act. There were so many accounts were there. So a lot of confusion among the bank also how to interpret this regulation. Because so many accounts were there, the transferring between the accounts, some transfer can be done, some transfer cannot be done. So the little bit of unclarity was there. So that has been addressed by this new act. So new act giving very precise definition. So it has been further relaxed to ensure everybody understand what is a cross-border transaction. The regulations are simplified. So going forward, it's greater efficiency by having this simplified regulation. Any foreign investor will convince, okay, this is straightforward. This is how I should, if I want to become invest in Sri Lanka, these are the things I should be noticing. So with that is the objective. That is the way forward. So this is the slide, the important slide where all these changes took place. This is how the Department of Foreign Exchange logo goes as. This is how they go, Department of Foreign Exchange under the central bank. Now, resident. This is where most of the people find it very difficult. What is resident definition? The earlier resident definition was if you have to be there in permanent a particular country, you have to be there continuously. Your permanent place of abode should be there for you to be considered as a resident. So that is the whole problem with the Exchange Control Act. People do not understand who is resident, who is non-resident. There has been always a doubt. Now that doubt is eliminated when Foreign Exchange Act was introduced. They are giving simplified definition. They simply say any resident who should be there within Sri Lanka 183 days. If you take a calendar, more than 6 months. You need not to be continuously stay in Sri Lanka for you to be resident. Aggregate, you can see the word aggregate. Aggregate means during the last 1 year, if you remain here for more than half a month, more than 6 months, need not be continuously. The earlier Exchange Control Act was very vague. It says permanent place of abode. They never defined the period. Now central bank got to know there had been a lot of ambiguity because of this the definition. They addressed the issue very precisely, saying anybody stayed in Sri Lanka more than 183 days in last 12 months, aggregate. Aggregate means it need not be continuously. So in simple term, if somebody, you and me, there's no problem. You and me are anyway resident because we are continuously here. But here the definition here for certain people, you need to establish whether they are resident. Why? Because they sometimes residing in other country. Sri Lankan, they take PR and go to some country. They stay there for 3 months and come back here. They are PR. PR means they can go to the other country and stay sometime, then come back here. When they come back here, they try to claim again they are resident. That is where the whole problem is come. So you need to understand who is resident. You and me, there's no problem. We are anyway resident here. There is no problem. There's nothing to establish. We are there for more than 300. The entire year we are there. So who has to establish the fact that they are resident here? There are people who comes and goes, and they are able to establish whether they are resident or not. That is what the resident definition. So I have given you certain things, right? Any citizen of Sri Lanka who has proceeded outside Sri Lanka temporarily on holiday or education, business, medical treatment for anything similar reason, not more than 182. So look at you go for a medical treatment in India, coming back again, or you go for a personal trip to India, coming back here. So definitely you will come within 2 weeks or 3 weeks time. You are never going to stay for more than 182 days anywhere. So you and me are resident. Our country base here. So we go for 1 month and coming back here. So there's no problem as far as we can go to any country, and if we don't stay more than 182 days, you and me, everybody is resident. So that means everybody going on a temporary visit to any country are residents. There's no problem. That is one. So where we fall into the first category. Look at the second category. We who proceeded outside Sri Lanka on a student visa granted to another country for a period of not more than 183 days upon the completion of studies. Remember the word completion of studies. Meaning, if a student goes to any country, right? If a student goes to any country, he goes with one-way ticket. Now, you and me go to any country, as a travel, we took both-way ticket. We come back to Sri Lanka. We know when we go to any country, we want to take a medical treatment, after the medical treatment, we come back. Or if you want to leisure trip, you go to a country, you come back. Anything, you will come back immediately, the matter of 6 months. The maximum you will stay maybe 1 month or 2 months. So you don't want 182 days. But here, student, if you feel, he has to complete the course, right? Still remember, if he goes with a student visa and he studied for 2 years, after completion of 2 years, within 182 days, if he come back, he is still resident. So remember, even a student, though he is physically not here, he is a resident. So you should know when to apply resident, when there are customer coming in, I want to send my money to my son, education payment. So you need to identify with this definition, am I remitting to resident? Am I remitting money to non-resident? If it is a non-resident, there are a certain restriction. That is what this resident definition is very important. So you have in put this long story short, anybody stays here, this will not applicable. You and me, not a problem. Even if you go to any other country, we are coming back within 3 months, 4 months, absolutely no problem. We are resident. Who has to establish the fact they are resident? A student who goes to any country, living there for 2 years for his education, he has to come back within 6 months' time. He has to come back, like you and me. After his completion of study, if he come back, up to that time he is a resident. If he doesn't come back and he stay there, then he can't stay there in the country unless he get a PR, permanent resident. Then he become a non-resident. So that is what the resident is important, right? Let us see who are the other people considered as resident. The diplomatic people. You know what is diplomatic people? Anybody who is diplomatic, they represent the country. Says there is a Sri Lankan person, ambassador in Mali. There is a Sri Lankan High Commission in India. There is a Sri Lankan High Commission in Pakistan. There is a Sri Lankan High Commission in UK or USA, Canada. Who are these people? Can anybody tell me who are these people? Who are these people represented Sri Lanka in other country? They are diplomatic people. They are the High Commissioner. What is their role there actually? What are they doing? Have you seen if you want to get a visa to any other country in Sri Lanka, to a particular country, when you want to go, you go to take a visa to that particular embassy, right? So the embassies are generally empowered by the respective government. Whenever Sri Lankans are coming to their country, they have the embassy in Sri Lanka. If you take example, if somebody want to go to India, the visas are processed by third party. The final visa given by Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka. So their role is to ensure any Sri Lankan coming to their country, the visas are given by the nominated person in India who is representing in Sri Lanka. Likewise, a Sri Lankan person representing Sri Lanka are seated in every country, and those people representing the governments. Therefore, all the diplomatic people, what, how do you, different name you may call them, consular, diplomatic, or high commissioner, whatever name you call them, they are representing Sri Lanka. So, if I give you an example, there is a Sri Lankan person sitting in UK as a Sri Lankan High Commission UK. How do you treat? Is that person treated as a resident or non-resident? If a Sri Lankan person working as a High Commissioner of Sri Lanka is in UK, is working in UK, but he representing Sri Lanka. What is he? Is he a resident or non-resident? He is a resident. Why? He is holding a government position. He is representing Sri Lanka in the different country. So though they are physically not here, remember those people are resident. So you should understand, if a diplomatic person, if you want to send money, you can do it because he's resident, right? An institution incorporated, registered in respect to, so any businesses registered in Sri Lanka, whether the ownership is half or more than by foreigner, all the business are resident institution. So you should identify any businesses registered having office in Sri Lanka, all are resident entities, right? So why, when you interpret this foreign currency account, there is a lot of definition comes in. The key words need to be applied, whether this transaction resident or non-resident. That is where you have to know the resident. So simply, you know the resident. Anybody remain here, you and me, there's no problem. Any institution here, no problem. Any of those Sri Lankan person representing government has the capacity of diplomatic, situated in, they are seated in any other countries, still they consider as a resident, though they are physically not here. Why? Because they are representing the government, because they are diplomatic people. Then government of Sri Lanka, including government corporation, all that here, there's no problem. State-owned, everything is. Citizen of foreign country who are resident or employed in Sri Lanka under the resident. This is where you have to be careful. Now there is a foreigner, we are going to call him as a resident. Citizen of foreign country, carefully listen, citizen of foreign country who are resident in, employed in Sri Lanka under resident visa. So remember, if anybody, the relevant visa is generally considered as resident visa. Relevant visa is generally when a foreigner, say there are some foreigners working here. If you take Lanka Hospital, if then it was called as Apollo Hospital at the inception. Then it name change after the ownership structure change, it became Lanka Medical. Still the initial doctor who came from India, most of them are still working in the Lanka Hospital. And they are foreigners. So how do you call them? Do you call them resident or non-resident? Indian doctors working in Apollo Hospital, how do you call them? Hello? You are in the, you can listen, right? You can see the slide, right?
Resident?
Yes, resident. Yes, they are here. Why we are calling them resident? Because they have a resident visa. So relevant visa meaning, if any foreigners working here with a resident visa considered as resident, so they should have a resident visa. Though they are foreigner, they are resident visa. Remember, you don't call any Indian tourist coming here because they will tourist visa. They have to come back and go. So you don't open any account for those people unless there's a special type of account they want. Otherwise, you don't generally open. So those people are tourists. They don't carry a resident visa. The resident visas are given, generally resident visa are given 1 year. Some nature of the duty is such they will have a 2-year visa, but it's renewable, always renewable. So resident visas are renewable, right? So they will, like Sri Lankan going and working in other country, no. So how do you the same way apply, right? So I have a few questions I'll ask you once these slides are over, right? Citizen of Sri Lanka who are employed on a Sri Lankan ship. So remember, any of citizen of Sri Lanka who are employed on a Sri Lankan ship, during the period of individual is so employed. If you are working for a Sri Lankan ship, whether the ship is any part of the world, if you belongs to that ship as an employee, you are considered as a resident, right? You are considered as a resident, right? Then there is, this is where you need to understand this last one. Individual who are citizen of Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan origin who do not satisfy the conditions specified shall be deemed to be resident only if the right. Now I think I have where I need to tell you something where, okay, I think I missed out here to explain to you. Student visa, businesses, right? Okay. Where employee, okay. Okay, I think in the example I'll cover that. Right, now take this example. Individual who are citizen of Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan origin who do not satisfy the conditions specified above shall be deemed to be resident in Sri Lanka only for the purpose of opening. Now, I think what has happened, I will show you, then only you will better understand it, right? Look at this account. Anybody can name these letters in word. Can anybody tell me what is RFC stand for? Anybody?
Resident foreign currency.
Resident foreign currency account. Now see, resident foreign currency account. What is this second one?
Non-resident foreign currency.
Non-resident foreign. Who can open this non-resident foreign currency? Now you know resident. That means you and me, who is in Sri Lanka, can open resident. Who is this NRFC? Who is open NRFC? A Sri Lankan working in any part, any other countries. That is called NRFC, right? Why I am showing this slide? This is a very important slide for exam point of view. These are some of the accounts that was open under Exchange Control Act. RFC stand for Resident Foreign Currency Account. NRFC stand for Non-Resident Foreign Currency Account. What is this account? RNNFC. Can anybody tell me what is that?
Resident non-national for
Resident non-national foreign currency account. Resident non-national. Tell me example. Can anybody? Then I know that you will understood. Who is resident non-national? Non-national is a foreigner. Non-national is always foreigner. Non-national means is a foreigner. It's a non-national. It's not a national. National means our country. Non-national, not our country. Then resident non-national. Who is that person? The Indian doctor.
Foreigners working in Sri Lanka.
Foreigners working in Sri Lanka. Yes, they are resident, but they are non-national because they are on a resident visa. The Indian doctor working in Lanka hospital are this category. Why I am explaining to this all this category to you? Because you could see these accounts are no more. That's why I put it in red. All these accounts gone into one bucket now. What is the name of the account now? What is the account you call that now? Personal foreign currency account. Yes, PFCA. Personal foreign currency account. Now, since you have these 4 types, can anybody tell me the last account? I like to hear. Anybody can tell me the last account? NRNNFA. You can try. All the similar word.
non-resident non-national foreign account.
Very good, very good. Non-resident, non-national foreign currency account. What is non-resident? What is non-national foreign currency account? Now you have to tell me. Little while ago I told you something. Non-resident, non-national foreign currency account. What do you mean by that non-resident? No, look at RNNFC. He's a foreigner but resident visa. That is what you call RNNFC. What is this NRNNFA? Non-resident, non-national. That means a person coming temporarily from a foreigner comes to Sri Lanka on a temporary basis. He also can open account. If he want to open account, he can open. So say Indian national coming here on a temporary visa, he can open the NRNNFA. So all these 4 category, now goes as what account? Personal foreign currency account. So you can see the confusion people had, the amount of confusion, because there were so many accounts were there. Central bank says Sri Lankan can open, they are categorized RFC, resident foreign. Then they say Sri Lankan working in Middle East, okay, they considered as NRFC, non-resident foreign. Then they said other segment, foreigners with a resident visa, there is a separate account. Foreigners on a temporary visa, there is a separate account. So you can see the amount of clarity requires when you have different types of account and transfer between these accounts. That is a difficult task under exchange control. Now everything addressed under foreign exchange. All these red mark, all are put together.
Excuse me.
Yes, ask the question.
Sir,
Yes.
I have a doubt. Some people are working at foreign countries for a long period, more than 182 days.
Okay.
So they come under the resident or non-resident?
Yeah. That is the question you asked. Now, they, for the purpose of opening PFCA, you consider them as what? To open a PFCA, you consider them as resident, but actually they are not resident. Right. That is where I stopped it to this slide and went to came from that slide. Now go back to the slide. I'll explain to you. I all of a sudden I came back to this slide. I want to explain to you. Now the asking you the question, more relevant question. Go through the last one I put you here. Now this is your question. Individual who are citizen of Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan origin who do not satisfy the conditions specified above shall be deemed to be resident in Sri Lanka only for the purpose of opening. So remember, though the Sri Lankan working in the Middle East country more than 2 years, 3 years, actually who are they? Are they resident or non-resident?
Resident.
Huh?
Resident?
No. Why? What is the definition we said? Anybody staying? If a Sri Lankan person more than 182 days, they say other country, they are gone. They are not a resident. They are non-resident. Only students, they can study. After completion of study, within 6 months, they have to come back. Until such time, they are resident. But if a Sri Lankan person working in Middle East for 2 to 3 years, 4 years, they are actually, are they resident? Actually, they are considered as non-resident. That is what you call NRFC account, non-resident foreign currency account. Now, central bank, what they did, they put all 4 accounts. See these 4 accounts, RFC, NRFC, RNFC, all put together under PFCA. So, if you really ask the definition, who is supposed to open a personal foreign currency account, there are various type of individuals. Now, central bank put all 4 type of people and put it in one basket and they say personal foreign currency account. Therefore, central bank says, if you now with the clarity, if you read this, you will better understand now. They say individuals who are citizen of Sri Lanka, they are citizen of Sri Lanka. Yes, they are citizen, they are Sri Lankan. They are not working on PR. They are on a temporary, they are on a resident visa in other country working. Right? When they are working for more than 183 days, they are not a resident. They are actually non-resident, but they are citizen of Sri Lanka, remember. They are working there, right? They are working. Therefore, central bank says, for the purpose of opening PFCA for those people, consider them as resident. That is what he has said. Now, if you read it, individual who are citizen of Sri Lanka or Sri Lankan origin, anybody who born here, Sri Lankan origin, who do not satisfy the condition specified above. What is the condition? More than 182 days, they say, above, shall be deemed to be resident in Sri Lanka only for the purpose of opening personal foreign currency account. Therefore, to whom this category, it is only for the Sri Lankan working abroad, it falls under this category. For them to open the PFCA, we have to consider them as a resident. Therefore, those people considered as a resident only for opening of personal foreign currency account. Actually speaking, they are non-resident. So understand? Only for opening PFC, you consider them as a resident because otherwise you will have a problem. Right. Now,
once they come back to Sri Lanka, they will become resident.
Yes, correct. They are anyway resident. There is no problem. They are anyway resident. They anyway resident, because you can see PF now the these accounts. If you really look at this account, you can see RFC. You and me can open. Anybody can open. Any Sri Lankan can open, and they also allow Sri Lankan working abroad. NRFC also foreigner can Sri Lankan can open. You and me can open. A person working in Middle East can open NRFC, but under exchange control, you have different account, different name for that account. RSC you call it resident, non-resident you call it, then you kill resident, non-national, then you say non-resident, all different names. Under Foreign Exchange Act, what they did is they put all 4 accounts together and they named as personal foreign currency account. So if you now look at what is the type of account, now I have given all these names, huh? So you should know every account by name. What is PFCA stand for? Anybody? Personal foreign currency account. Anybody tell me what is BFCA stand for? This is just business. Yes, business foreign currency account. One is personal foreign currency account, other one is business foreign currency. What is IIA? Inward investment account. There are 2 types of investment. Anything coming into Sri Lanka, you call inward investment account. Anything going out of Sri Lanka investing outside, OIA, outward investment account. IIA stand for inward investment account. OIA stand for outward investment account. CTRA stand for capital transaction rupee account. Capital transaction rupee account. Then they have created a new account. There could be a question. ERIA, Emigrant Remittable Income Account. Emigrant Remittable Income Account. Then non-resident rupee account. Then external commercial. Don't worry about this. We are going to study all these latest abbreviation I have given. The first type of account. So before we go into each account, for the purpose of this this direction, see immediate. They use the word immediate family members. Who is this immediate family member? Immediate family member means spouse, parents, children, not siblings. Siblings are not immediate family member. You have to be very careful. You might get a in part 1. You might get a question. Immediate family member mean what? Spouses, spouse, not spouses, spouse, parents, children. So if husband, wife is spouse, their children, their parents are immediate family members. So if a family want to go a trip, they want to take foreign exchange out of the husband's account, husband can take on behalf of his wife, husband can take on behalf of his children, husband can take as a parents, he could consider them as a parent, father, mother. So remember, immediate family member means children's, parents, partner, husband or wife. Brother, sister will not come. Nobody will come immediate family. Only these categories are come. So remember, immediate. Remittance means any fund transferred by way of telegraphic transfer, interbank transfer, anything do with the payment bank to bank is considered as remittance. Can be generally considered as foreign currency, inward and outward. That is called remittance. Foreign currency means any currency other than Sri Lanka rupee is foreign currency. Foreign currency account means foreign currency account in a licensed commercial bank to deal in foreign. So you know what is authorized dealer. We studied in foreign exchange. Authorized dealers are commercial banks have been permitted to maintain foreign currency account. You know, as authorized dealer, they can buy, sell, borrow, lend, and maintain foreign set of foreign currency account. Current transaction. So these words are important. What is current transaction? Current transaction means you very frequently you will come to very frequently the current transaction, capital transactions are discussed, right? So I will explain in simple word. Current transaction means any transaction without involvement of transfer of assets. Assets is real asset, financial assets. Those are assets. Without movement of assets, without the movement of transfer of asset, any transaction considered as current. That means if you spend for goods or services are considered as current transaction. Remember, any payment you do for goods or services considered as current. Anything do with the assets, maybe financial asset, maybe real asset, immovable property. you transfer your shares, debentures, all that's a financial asset. So a movement of assets considered as capital in nature. So you have two type of transaction, remember. One is current, other one is capital. In foreign exchange, there are two type of transaction always. Current transaction, which is not involvement of, you can see, means which are not for the purpose of transferring capital assets, include without limitation. So you can do any transaction without any limitation as far as those transactions are without the movement of assets, funds, without the movement of funds related to assets are considered as current. In simple word, for you to better understand it, any transaction deal with goods or services is considered as current transaction. Right? So if I give you example, say you want to buy some goods, import some goods. Any imports of commodity is considered as current transaction. Anything you want to sell or use in a personal use, you buy something and selling into the market, all that, all vehicle importer, you import electrical item, any imports coming into country is current. Export also current, because you're exporting goods or services, that's all. But remember, if you want to make an investment outside Sri Lanka, that is not current. That is investment. That is asset. So you have to be very careful. That is capital transaction. If you are migrating, you are selling all your asset and you are migrating. That is capital in nature. You go for a medical treatment, you go for a foreign trip, you go for education, everything current. Why? These are services, goods or services. That is current. So remember this definition. Current transaction means any current transaction is permitted in foreign currency account. But capital transactions are not permitted. Capital transaction means movement of assets. It can be financial asset, it can be real asset. Right? If you are buying a shares in other country, it's a capital. If you are investing, it's capital. Right? So you should know the difference between current and capital. Okay. So we are now going to look at personal foreign currency account. So now I am going to ask you a few questions. So first you see the eligibility. Who could open the personal foreign currency account? An individual including a minor who is a Sri Lankan national. An individual including a minor who is a Sri Lankan national. What do you mean by that? An individual including a minor who is a Sri Lankan national can open. So who can you tell me who are the people falling under this category? To open PSEA, any individual including a minor who is a Sri Lankan national. What do you mean by that? Can you and me open? Are we Sri Lankan national? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. No doubt about it. Can a minor open? Can a boy who is 10 years, can he open? Yes, he can. So which category? Now tell me which category under Exchange Control Act, which category is this? There were 4 types of accounts open. Which category is this? RSC, resident foreign. Everybody resident. Right. So now one by one, when you listen only, you know all that 4 category comes in different form. Right. Second one, it's same thing, but slightly different. An individual, carefully listen, an individual of Sri Lankan origin, including a minor who is resident outside Sri Lanka. Now, to open a personal foreign currency account, an individual of Sri Lankan origin, including a minor who is resident outside Sri Lanka. What does it mean? An individual of Sri Lankan origin. What do you mean by Sri Lankan origin? Including a minor who is resident outside Sri Lanka. Who is resident outside Sri Lanka? That means non-resident. Who are these people? Now I will give you an example. Tell me yes or no. Say a Sri Lankan couple, they have migrated to Australia, right? Can they open PFCA? can they open PSCA? Sri Lankan husband and wife, they have gone to Australia under PR, permanent migration, under PR. Can they open PFC account?
Yes.
Yes, they can open. They can open. Why they can open? An individual of Sri Lankan origin, including a minor who is resident outside Sri Lanka. Now remember, earlier NRFC can be opened by Sri Lankan people who have migrated outside. They can open NRFC. That NRFC only comes as different form here now. That NRFC here, now they consider any Sri Lankan origin can open. Still PSC also same theory apply. So remember, if a person Sri Lankan origin means they husband and wife, they married here and they went to Australia, settled down. Now they have a child. They have a child. Can the child open minor? He's a minor. Can the minor open a PSC account? Yes or no? Can the minor open? Say husband and wife Sri Lanka. And the child born in Australia. He's Australian. He's Australian passport. He's Australian birth. He born in Australia. He's Australian. Can he open a PSC account? Yes, he can. Why he can? Because look at the definition. An individual of Sri Lankan origin, including a minor. Because he's the origin of, that minor is origin of Sri Lankan. His father, mother is a Sri Lankan origin. Therefore, the minor can open. So remember, though he is a foreigner, the father, mother is Sri Lankan origin. So the minor also can open. So this is the definition they are given for PFC. Don't get confused with the resident or non-resident. Here the definition PFC, they consider personal foreign currency account could be open because of the 4 categories they amalgamated. That is the reason. Otherwise, they can simplify this account, right? Now they have put all 4 categories into one bucket. Now look at the third category. A non-national resident in Sri Lanka, including a minor. What do you mean by that? Who is this person? A non-national resident in Sri Lanka, including a minor. Can anybody tell me example? A non-national resident in Sri Lanka, including a minor. As I told you, an Indian doctor. An Indian doctor. He's a resident. Why did we say resident? A non-national, Indian, resident in Sri Lanka. He must be on a resident visa. Including a minor. Even his child. Child is also here. So central bank permit them to open PFC account. So you should know under PFC, a lot of people are coming in to open. So you must ask, sir, why all this confusion? Why all these people are coming? I will give you the answer. Now let us go for other 2 more categories. Then look at the other one. A non-national, a foreigner, either on temporary visit to Sri Lanka or intending visit to Sri Lanka. That means he is going to come to Sri Lanka next month. That person also can open a PFC. So you must be wondering why these different type of people are there. That is because this is the reason. If you, I'll go back here. Look at this. Look at this 4 type of red marks. So when central bank put RFC, NRFC, RNFC, NRNNFA, these 4 accounts are no more there. So when they eliminate these 4 accounts, they have to create an account because all this existing already open account has to go into this. And not only that, the new people who are falling into this category are coming in future. All that people can be accommodated under personal foreign currency account. That is the reason you have different eligibility. Because of these 4 different accounts are coming into personal foreign currency account, you need to accommodate them. That is the reason under PFCA eligibility criteria, you can see different people are coming. That is because they have 4 accounts. So here you just make a note and say PFCA accounts amalgamation of, I think in this slide you can have that note also. I have put it here. I think this slide gives amalgamation of 4 type of accounts. RFC, NRFC, RNFC, NRNNFA. These 4 amalgamation only PFCA. Therefore, you can see different eligibility people are coming in under PFCA because that now only one account they identify for personal foreign currency account. So you remember, if anybody coming to your bank and asking, I want to open a personal foreign currency account, simply your answer should be, what are the things you will? If he is a Sri Lankan, absolutely no problem. If he's a foreigner, he's on a resident visa, no problem. If he's a foreigner, temporary visa, no problem. So you don't have any problem to open a PFCA. But remember, there is an organization. They are now coming and asking you to open a PFCA account. They say, we are foreign entity, we are registered here, we want to open a PFCA account. Now my answer, can they open or not? Can a business open a PFCA or not?
No.
No. Why? What is the reason? Why no? Look at the title of the account. Personal. No businesses coming in. No sole proprietor. Nothing. It's only individuals. Remember the word individuals. You can see all the definition eligibility. See, an individual of Sri Lankan origin, a non-national. All that are representing individuals. So this is only for individual people. Personal foreign currency. No business can open personal foreign currency account. So remember, this is what in exam point of view, there is no bigger question on asking for you exam. In exam point of view, you will be asked simple question. But for you to better understand what is personal foreign currency account. What is this last one? Administrator, executor. Who are these people? Administrator, executor mean if a person has a last will, say a Sri Lankan person, yes, write a last will and death. You know what is last will? He said, after my death, this property has to go to these people, right? Or else he died without writing a last will. So there will be two situations. A person, elderly person, he has lot of assets. He has wrote his assets to go to so and so. There is a situation, he has accidentally died. He has not thought, he is very young. His assets should go to somebody. Therefore, there are two cases. One is administrator, other one is executor. Administrator, executor. So these two people are appointed according to the last will or without the last will. So these two guys will open a deceased person asset. That is the reason, according to the code, these people have been told to maintain the account. Suppose say there is a PFC account, all of a sudden that particular person passed away. His dependent can operate the account unless it is a joint account. Say it's an individual account. So this property has to be maintained by somebody. If he has written a last will, accordingly, there will be executor. There will be administrator appointed by the court, or according to the last will, there is a one person. So those are the people are there. So you need not to worry about, but remember, these people are there because of this reason, right? When person died, somebody has to look after his assets. That is the reason these people have been given permission to continue the account. They are also eligible to open to get the problem to distribute the assets. Until such time, the account will open under their names. Right. Permitted credit to PSC account. What are the permitted credits to PSC account? Remember, any foreign currency account, what is the one credit that can come into any foreign currency account? How do you call that? Remittances, inward remittances. That means that is what you call remittances in foreign exchange received from outside Sri Lanka in favor of the account holder through the banking system. Yes, the money has to come by way of banking system. That is what you call inward remittances. The monies are coming through banking channel to Sri Lanka. Through the banking channel, you can credit the money. So the PFC account, if you open a PFC account, anybody can open a PFC account as an individual capacity. Why they open? Because they are getting some money. Say your brother is in working in Middle East. He might send some money to you, right? But you intend to keep that money in foreign currency itself. So you go to the bank and open a PFC. You can open. You are a resident. You can open a PFC account. So where is the money coming to the PFC account? Your brother sends. Your sister in other country sends. if you don't get any inward remittances, there's no point opening this account. You can't go to the market, buy dollars and deposit to this account. No, you can't do that. You can only have inward remittances, right? Exceptionals, they are given permission when you are traveling foreign exchange, when you take foreign exchange, when you are traveling out of rupee account. If you have any balance, with that you can open RFC under the new regulation they permitted. But that doesn't mean you can buy it from outside and open. You have to show the document evidence you have taken the foreign exchange from the bank, right? Say, for example, I'm giving an example. You don't have a PSC account, right? You don't have PSC account. You have gone to some country for a visit. Say Canada, you have gone and meet your brother. So your brother has given some money to you in Canada. That money, if you want to deposit, yes, you can come and tell, I visit to Canada, this is the money I brought. Or else, you have gone to visit to a particular country, say you have gone to Malaysia, right? And you have taken $1,000 from Sri Lanka. By giving rupee, you bought currency notes to travel Malaysia. When you come back, you have $300 left over. Now, central bank says, if the $300 if you have, you can open a PSC account and put that 300. So that is something they are permitting now. So those type of things also you can open. So if you don't have any way of incoming remittances, you can't, no point opening PSC. But if you feel by maintaining a, remember one thing is, if anybody want to open a PS foreign currency account, that is the best. But you should have inflow to come in. You can't black market buy and deposit. That is not permitted. The bank will not allow you to do that. If you are anybody working in Middle East or working anywhere outside Sri Lanka, if you are getting frequent remittances, open a PFC. Otherwise, it's no point, right? So that is one. So this is money coming from outside. Transfer from a PFC of the same account holder or immediate family member. What do you mean by this? At least in exam point of view, they might get a question, write 3 permitted credit to PFC account. They are possible. Sometimes you might get a question, right? At least I have given you few credit, at least know 1 or 2 credits. That means any inward remittances coming through the banking channel is definitely 1 credit. Second credit, transfer from a PFC of the same account holder. What do you mean by same account holder? Let's say your name is Pereira. You have account at Bank of Ceylon. You can transfer, you have other account at Commercial. From your account, you can transfer from Bank of Ceylon to Commercial. You can do. Or you can transfer from your account to your son's account. Or you can transfer from your account to your spouse account. Or your father can transfer from his account to your account. Because they say immediate family member. So transfer from PFC of the same account holder or immediate family member. So remember that. So if somebody come and when you are working in a bank, especially in foreign department, somebody come and say, I have a PFC account, I have $1,000. Can you send 500 to my brother's account at Commercial Bank? A customer coming, you are working at Bank of Ceylon. He comes and giving the instruction, I have $1,000. I want to transfer out of this 1,500 to my brother's account at Bank of Ceylon. You are working at People's Bank, let's say. You are working at People's Bank. You are getting instruction from one of your customer to transfer his PSC account $1,000. Out of that, 500 to his brother's account at Bank of Ceylon. Is that permitted or not? Answer yes or no. Can you transfer from your PSC account to your brother's account in any other local bank here? Or your sister's account? Sister's account, can you do that?
Can.
Can.
No, sir, we can't.
You can't. Immediate family member. I told you siblings are not immediate family member. You can't transfer. You can transfer to your own account. You can transfer to your father's account. Father can transfer to son's account. Wife can transfer to husband account. Husband can transfer to wife account. Siblings are not there. So categorically you have to be careful. Transfer from the PFC of the same account holder or immediate family member. So you have to be very careful. If A comes and giving you instruction, transfer to A's account at Bank of Ceylon, it's the same person. I am coming and telling my bank, transfer 500 to my commercial bank account. Yes, same person can do. I am coming and giving instruction, transfer to my wife's account. Yes, no problem, can be done. I am coming and telling, transfer to my mother's account. Can. But I can't come and tell, transfer to my brother's account, transfer to my sister's account. They are not immediate family members. So you have to be very careful. Right? You have to be very careful. You can't do that. Then foreign currency notes brought into Sri Lanka by the account holder when exceeds or equal to 15,000 or other foreign currency declaration. So you must remember there is a regulation in Sri Lanka. If anybody brings $15,000 or its equivalent, always remember when you are quoting a currency, you can't say $15. You have to say or its equivalent. So anybody bringing in $15,000 or more, there is a counter at Sri Lanka airport. There is a counter called customs counter. You have to go to the counter and declare it and bringing it. Always better declare it and bringing in more than 15,000. If it is less than 15,000, if you want to deposit your bank account, you have to declare to the authorized dealer. So there are two things happening here. You can carefully read this. Foreign currency notes brought into Sri Lanka by the account holder when exceed 15,000 or equivalent on declaration to customs department. That is airport, there is a customs department. Less than 15,000 or its equivalent, declaration to the AD, authorized dealer. So I am giving an example. Say I am coming from, after working in Middle East, I am coming to Sri Lanka. Now I have $5,000. I have $5,000. So I am not declaring anywhere because if it is anything 15 only, I have to go to customs. Less than 15, I need not go to anywhere. I just coming in. Now I want to deposit to my bank account. When I take the $5,000, I go to my bank and say I want to deposit $5,000 to my PFC account. Because bank have been told by central bank, when you are depositing currency note, when you are accepting currency notes to PFC account, make sure you get a declaration. If it is less than 15,000, declaration from the customer. That means I am the customer. Now I will have to tell, I have to give a small letter to my bank. I have worked in Middle East. On my vacation, I came to Sri Lanka. I was brought with me $5,000. Please deposit to my PFC account. That is small declaration I am giving. Can that declaration only sufficient? Will the bank ask any more document? Is that small piece of declaration sufficient? No, it is not sufficient because bank has to ensure whether I am really travel. So they will ask my passports, whether arrival, whether I my arrival. So they have to take my passport and look at my arrival. So there only they know I have traveled from Middle East. So I have to give my passport arrival, rubber stamp, and the declaration. That is perfect document. Let's say I am coming to the bank. I have brought with me $18,000. I want to deposit the entire 18,000. Can I give a declaration to the bank and asking the bank to deposit, or is it possible? $18,000. Is it possible? Can I give a declaration to the bank, or I need to give a custom declaration? Which one is the right answer? Custom declaration or my declaration to the bank? My declaration to the bank only comes less than 15,000. More than 15,000 or equivalent, custom declaration. So remember, anybody brings into the deposit to their PFC account, if it is more than 15,000, that should have been declared at the customs. So you can't accept it. So my bank might say, look here, you are bringing 18,500. We can't take your declaration because more than 15 you are supposed to declare at the custom, and the custom will give a declaration certificate that you have to show it to the bank when you want to deposit more than 15,000. Is that clear? Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes. Any question? No. Right. Unutilized foreign currency obtained for travel purposes by the account holder and for immediate family. Unutilized foreign currency. This is what I told you. If you have taken foreign currency, if you have anything left over, you can take it from your PFC account. Anything balance, you can put it back to the account. Right? Even if you take out of rupee account, still you can put it to the PFC account. Right. Then transfer from a business foreign currency account. We are going to look at it. Business foreign currency account, inward investment account of the same account holder. Yes, they are permitting same account holder. I have a BFC account. I can transfer from my BFC to my PFC account. Can do. I am the same person. So you might ask in the question, sir, can an individual open a business also? Yes, individual can open business foreign currency account also. Business cannot open a PFC account. So remember the difference. Individual can open both accounts, personal foreign currency as well as business foreign currency. But business cannot open a PFC account. PFC are meant for personal, individuals, right? So a person who has a BSC account or who has an inward investment account, he has an individual person, he has an II account to bring some investment. Same account holder can transfer to his PFC account. Then if you have interest, if your accounts are in a savings account, you have an interest. So that will be credited to your account. So remember, in exam point of view, personal foreign currency account, what are the 3 credits? You can easily remember the 1 credit. That is any inward remittance received through the banking channel. So your answer should be what is the permitted credit? Inward remittances came through banking channel is 1 credit. Transfer from the same PFC account holder or immediate family member. Then you can say interest to the account. More than enough. 3 credits. So remember, you need not to write all that. Remember, simple 3 credit. So we look at the permitted debits. Permitted debits. Right. I think I'm supposed to stop it. I think. Can we continue or want to stop it? Tired, right? After working, tired. You feel tired? Yes or no? Tired? How do I take it? Silence. Can I continue or you are tired? You want to stop it? Why silence? Silence means enough. Is that correct? If everybody continue, I can continue. Okay. I'll stop it because you are after working. Most of you working. So we will have our usual class on Sunday. We will continue from there. Okay.